Thank you for tuning in to Around the World in 80 Oysters, a live show about international oyster cuisine, culture, and appreciation. I'm Julie Chu. I'm the founder of In a Half Shell, your guide to the world's best oysters and most interesting oyster people. And today we are going to Canada. Finally, I know it's been on my mind for a long time, and I'm so excited to bring to you guys a special guest, Eamon Clark, who is a 9-time Canadian oyster shucking champion, head purchaser of oysters at Rodney's Oyster House, and the son of the famous Rodney Clark, who is the founder of Rodney's Oyster House. I'm going to bring Eamon on. Oh, before I forget, please, if you're tuning in live, ask some questions in the comments, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, and we will answer them at the end. Hey, Eamon.
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning to you too.
Thank you for taking time out of your weekend
Oh
to
yeah,
join this. I know it's a
yeah.
busy weekend for you guys.
Well, I was gonna say that's all I got. It's time. It's just time. That's it, right? So I'm
Absolutely.
happy to be spending that with you.
Cool. Well, tell me where you're calling in from.
Toronto, Ontario, Canada. At my house with my family, just hanging out, and yeah, just that's where I'm calling from.
Cool. So I know Rodney's is in Toronto as well. I'm going to just share a little geography lesson, which I always like to do here. Whenever
Hmm.
I start this show, and it's now
Yeah, that's
become
us.
that's you. Well, this is New York,
Yeah,
which is now honing into where I am, and
just over
over
the
there.
bay.
I was so happy that a couple years ago I had a chance to visit. I think you were out of the country though at the time.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, I think you were in Ireland.
Oh,
It was 2018.
I might have been.
Yeah, I think you
I
were in
might have been.
Ireland.
Yeah. It wasn't in. Yeah. Hopefully, that's a good place to be. Anyways, I hope I was
Yeah.
there, crushing
Well, you
Guinness.
yes. Well, you were yeah, it was a nice fall, but we had some oysters. I was at Rodney's with Patrick McMurray, who gave me
Yes.
like the grand tour.
Oh
It
yeah,
was so cool.
the mayor
It
of
was,
Oysters in Toronto, Patrick McMurray.
oh, is he?
He'll take you on the tour. He'll take you on the tour.
So this is
Yeah,
where you guys are.
that's
Um,
it.
yeah. So like, guess tell me. Let's start from the beginning. So
Yeah.
tell me about how you got into oysters. It sounds like it's been a thing in the family, but really, what has your journey been?
Well, it's funny. How I got into oysters, obviously, well, not obviously. My dad is Rodney, and he started a business with a bunch of people back in the '80s. The business is Rodney's Oyster House, and growing up, I was about 3 years old when it opened, and it was and still is. But back in the '80s, what a great time that would have been to be wining and dining in a great
Sure.
city like Toronto or anywhere in general. Just things were a lot more loosey goosey. Nobody was videotaping everything and taking photos to incriminate you like the next day or minutes later.
Right.
Um, and that was Rodney's. It was a place where you could go, and it was very open and fun. And growing up, there would be a lot of chatter about how great of a place it was, and the people that worked there that I started to learn about and meet were people that I wanted to be around. And my sister also was working in the business much earlier before me, making chocolate mousse in the kitchen. And it was just a really good community of people. It was a great restaurant, and it was a great time. So
Yeah.
that's what drew me in. It's oysters. Oysters are super fun. They're super interesting. They bring really good quality people around to enjoy. It's a very honest product, and yeah, I just that's how I got into it. It was a really fun, cool restaurant. People were getting hammered, enjoying some of the best food you could eat in the world,
Right.
and they were enjoying really fresh, good quality products. And
Did you
yeah,
start as did you work your way up to become the head of purchasing for Rodney's, or did you just like fall into that because you had sort of the
well,
knowledge built
yeah,
up?
like I wasn't like I was your typical young boy growing up. Like I probably wasn't the best person to be around. I drank 4 or 5 Coca Colas when I'd sneak into the restaurant on a Saturday. The crew would be hungover and they're like, listen, just leave me alone. Here's a Coca-Cola and a chocolate mousse. Fold some
Go away.
napkins, right? Yeah, and I'd fold napkins on the end of the bar.
Okay.
As I got a bit older, they would give me money to go and get them, pea meal bacon sandwiches down at the St. Lawrence Market.
Yeah.
And I was just buzzing. Like my dad used to tell me, like when he would go out and do oyster deliveries to restaurants, I would hold open the door for him.
Mm.
Maybe that's where it started, that sort of cultural, just being a part of the family business.
Yeah.
But yeah, the way I became the purchaser was just, I got into the shucking because
Mm-hmm.
I love competition. I'm super competitive. I love the idea of competing against people and bettering yourself at all times. And with the shucking and the competition, working at Rodneys is intense at sometimes, right? Like it can
Oh, what do you
be
mean?
2 or 3 thousand oysters a night you're
Ah,
responsible to
like the
open, right?
quantity.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was seeing some issues with the products. If it was dry, if it was not graded or culled properly, if the clients were not enjoying them by any chance or something like that.
Mm.
So, being that annoying young man or kid, I was going, I could. Why are these oysters like this? And then they said, well, why don't you order them, Eamon? And I said, fine, I'll order them.
Oh,
And then
oh
that's
snap.
how it happened. Yeah. So yeah, about like 10 years ago, or I guess it was, or not even, I
Okay.
don't even know how long it was. I just started, um, Anne Marie, my father's business partner, she was in charge of the communication with the growers and
Okay.
stuff. And I started to talk with them and build those relationships.
So what did you when I guess that's a good segue into when you're looking at all the oysters that are available to you. I mean, what is out there for people who don't know Canadian oysters that well?
Well, Canadian oysters are, in I guess in my opinion, are some of the best oysters you can have in the world. We have such a large country, two different oceans, two
Mm-hmm.
different species, um, incredible people who work with the oysters, but just
Mm-hmm.
like the cold waters, the beautiful summers, the growing spurts that you can get in an oyster out of, say, Prince Edward Island or Nova Scotia or New Brunswick.
Yeah, let's
Um,
go to these places for
yeah,
people.
like the just remote areas that are naturally, they just not disturbed. Um,
Okay.
yeah, it's just some of the best oysters come from there. We also do, like at Rodney's, we're federally inspected for fish processing plants, so we're
Ah,
allowed to
okay.
work with a lot of people around, anybody around the world that's licensed to ship outside of their country.
Huh.
So we can work with those people, and we bring in oysters directly from them. No middlemen in the sense of like worrying about shelf life and did we get last week's order
Yeah.
oysters? No, we have a great communication with our suppliers, and they understand the cull and the grade. We're looking for a
Okay.
nice oyster that's
So is your
three in,
is
yeah.
is your grade different than other places? Do you would say is it more stringent or
No, I,
okay?
I, I think that that's pretty much across the board.
Okay.
It can be really good, but some producers are a lot better than others.
Mm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
also, I was just talking with somebody the other day. It's, like having a good quality oyster is a very important thing to have. If you give like a set of, or like a shipment of really bad oysters, or oysters that are not graded properly or culled properly, chances are we're just going to source somebody else out that is doing a great job. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? The consistency is so key to have a really consistent oyster because
Why is that important?
um, I think it's important for multiple reasons, but most importantly, when you when you come into, say, our business, we'll suggest 12 oysters for you, right?
Okay.
Or like somebody will sit down and go, hey, like what should we get today? Now that's on you. So you go up to the oyster bed and you pick out 12 oysters. Now consistency is good for a business, because if you're going up and you get a box of 100 and you're throwing out 13% of them, that's not good. But if you're discarding one or two oysters because of a natural um, issue, that's
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of, that's what you deal with, right? Certain times of the
Right.
year it's better, certain times it's worse, but um, the consistency on the plate, the way that the oyster looks, to be able to identify like that oyster is from Yvon Chasson in Lamech, New Brunswick. It's got a
Right.
nice green shell. Like you don't want to have these standard looking oysters. The other side of it is oyster shuckers can snap easily in the sense where they're just like, I can't open these. The hinges are too tight, and they're just snapping off. I don't want these. Don't shuck them. They're terrible. But meanwhile, the meats inside are okay, but the shell is like it's been produced really quickly and it's gotten thin and long. You want that deep shell.
I mean, when I actually on my trip to Toronto in general, it was really eye opening that just about every single oyster, no matter where I was like shucked beautifully. And I don't know if like what is this like Canada's secret to being able to shuck and it was everywhere. It was like at Rodney's, it was at Oyster Boy, it was at like this little oyster pop up, Oyster Island, like all those places. Like everybody just knew how to open them flawlessly.
Yeah, I mean, so Rodney's 33 years old. A lot of people that work together in the beginning now have their own businesses and do stuff, do their oyster services and shucking and restaurant services themselves, right? I guess what happened was back in the day, everybody worked together on really presenting and understanding what a perfectly shucked oyster is, and that's translated over the years into a
Got
standard.
it. Got
So
it.
maybe
So
the
it like
standard is,
disseminated.
yeah, like, back in the day when they used to have these oyster shucking competitions at the Southern Ontario one, which was hosted at Rodney's, but it was like in a parking lot behind the restaurant. It was more of a party, and then there was like three or four people that were such hardos at like, wanting to go into the shucking
Right.
competition and just like really kick people's butts and like prove. And then that sort of competition expanded into everybody wanting to be really good at it. And then more importantly is what you brought up, just the general presentation of an oyster. Like if you shuck an oyster really badly
Mm.
and you're picking out shell or it looks like it's been chewed, yeah, like huge thumbs down. Like
Yeah.
anybody who goes to me, they're like, oh, I had oysters and I don't really like them. I'm like, where'd you have them? They're
Yeah.
like, oh, I was hammered at Hooters. I'm like, well, like, whoa, I can see how that would
Right.
suck.
It's like
You know what I mean?
that.
Let me show you how it's really good,
That
and you
makes
do like
sense.
a nice, perfectly shucked oyster, and people tend to drop that into their mouth. And with a perfectly shucked oyster, something that's really fresh, right? Like
Yeah.
it has to be a little bit of both. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
can Canadian locals, do they typically like to just go to oyster bars because they know they can get this good service to have oysters, or do you see a lot of people bringing them home and shucking them themselves?
Well, pre-COVID, whatever,
Yeah.
everybody was out eating oysters because we're a super multicultural city.
Okay.
Have uh, we have a great following of clientele, people that really enjoy oysters, but they're also very educated because there is a lot of options out there.
Mm,
Um, I think people understand that once you have a really good oyster, it's hard to forget that experience. You know what I mean? So they'll chase that again and again. There's times of birthdays or celebrations that they want to celebrate with a nice treat, and that's like a plate of oysters that's huge and delicious, but yet they're fresh, they're properly shucked.
sure.
Yeah, so I think the city really understands good quality food
Hmm.
because of how diverse it is, and I think that they want to go for things that are um, maybe a little bit more challenging to do at home. Like if you've never
Okay.
shucked an oyster and you're just like, here's 50, I'm going to bring them home and just crush this out. Most of the time it's like, that's a lot harder than it actually is.
Mm,
But now we're forced into this situation where there's not the availability to go sit down at the oyster bar and belly
hmm.
up and sit there and eat oysters and enjoy it. So you have to come home and challenge
Right.
yourself and do it yourself. Yeah.
Right. That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Now, do you have a sense of raw versus cooked? Are cooked oysters all that popular, or is
Yeah.
raw the way to
Like
go?
if I'm going to cook an oyster, it's probably going to be the Gigas species, something from, the Pacific, because um, that oyster to me is going to hold up a lot better when it comes to heat. It's a little
Mm,
bit more of a firmer, fatter oyster than a Virginica. An East
I
Coast
see.
oyster, when you cook it, it tends to really shrink down quite a lot. and then it's almost just sauce at that point. West Coast oyster,
Right.
it will, you can barbecue it and it's still got a
Right.
lot of texture. It still holds itself up very
Are there
well.
varieties of West Coast that you prefer to grill or barbecue?
Yeah, I like like what they call a beach medium or a beach small. Like a
Okay.
3 inch, 3.5 inch oyster that's been taken maybe from a bag or tray cultured, and then it's left on the beach to harden up,
Ah,
or
got
it's spent a majority of its time on the beach hardening up because that once again that shell, the density of the shell will hold on the to the heat of the grill or the heat of the oven,
Yeah.
and also it's got the size that if it does and when it does shrink down, you're
Yeah.
still left with something to chew into, right?
Yeah. Makes
I
sense.
wouldn't eat it raw because
It's probably too overwhelming.
oh, I'm the biggest wuss when it comes to like oysters are work for me. It's like a lot of chefs won't eat their own food, because they
Yeah.
consider it to be work, right? For me, oysters are work, and you put like a big oyster in front of me, it's a fear factor for me. I'm like, I can't do this. I'm like, I'm out, like I'm off the island at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about competitive shucking. Is being a
Yes.
9-time shucking champion, you know the secret,
Yeah.
obviously. Can you give like a quick overview of how the competitions work in the country and what you need to do to get to like the next level? I know that the worlds are in Ireland and there's a couple others out there too. So yeah, just take us through sort of what that scene is like.
Shucking is in competitions in Canada, in Ontario at least, it's very competitive. Meaning
Okay.
that like if we host the Southern Ontario Shucking Championships in July, it won't go on this year, but we've been doing it for a long time, and you get anywhere from like 40 to 50 shuckers. Now,
Wow.
out of that, there's like 20 of them are unreal. And sorry, my son's just buzzing.
It's okay.
Um, 20 of them are like unreal shuckers, like meaning like at any point they can just get in there and dominate. The other competitions around the country are the same way. Like you go to the West Coast, you have people who shuck predominantly gigas oysters. So
Mm,
and East Coast guy goes out there, they might have the advantage. But
mm,
the idea of competition, in all honesty, is anybody can win at any time. Nothing is ever guaranteed because you can get bad oysters, you can have a good day, you can have a bad day, whatever. It's competition.
hmm
But the only way you get better at it is if you have in my opinion, I've been lucky enough to be at Rodneys and shuck a ton of oysters,
Right.
and you have to think of it so important. Like imagine, like my mom is very important to me. So if my mom was to walk into Rodney's, sit down in the bar, I'd want to get her 12 or 18 oysters as quickly as possible
hmm
in the best shape. You know what I mean? Like
hmm hmm
no grit, no shell, like not cut up, disconnected from the bottom. That's the mentality you take into like a competition. You
Right.
just say, "Mom needs 12 or Mom needs 18 or whatever," right?
Mom's
Like
hungry.
that's
Let's see, mom.
exactly. Yeah, if you're not going to punk your mom with some like custy oysters, you're going to go out there and do it really nice. And
Yeah.
you travel across the country here, and it's competitive. People take it very seriously, and the best part of it is also people don't. It's not life or death for 95% of the people. It's
No.
about coming together, having some beers, hanging out, chirping each other, and just showcasing what you've been up to.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it. That's the way I see it. But,
Are there a lot of competitors that are coming from Rodney's?
yeah, I mean, like tons. I think in the last like 5 or 6, maybe even more, the Canadian shucking champions over the last, I think, like 20 years
Mm.
have all worked at Rodney's except for one of them.
Oh
No,
wow.
two. Jason Nagy and Jason Woodside.
Okay.
Those are the two guys who've. I might be forgetting something, and our Daniel's in there. He never worked at Rodney. So there's a few, but there's a lot of them did work at Rodney's at one point in time.
Wow.
They have, there's Mike at Tide and Vine. They got their own operation, but Mike was a hilarious thing. One day he picked up the crew in a magic school bus to take us to Niagara Falls for a staff party, and we were like, he's a great guy, but we are like, the problem with my sister was like, "Do you want a job?" He's like, "Sure." He's like, "I'd love to learn." And he came in, and now him and his wife met at Rodney's, and They have a beautiful operation in Niagara. I mean,
Amazing.
the Oyster House has brought a lot of people in and out of its doors, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of great stories. And a lot of those people do shuck oysters now,
Yeah.
as a living or whatever.
Well, speaking of stories, do you have any other stories that you remember from Rodney's that really
Oh
encapsulates the
my
oyster
God.
culture? I know there's too many, and for people who have never been inside Rodney's, like let me tell you,
Oh
it's like a
God.
museum that is also your favorite neighborhood bar, and every single corner has like something, and I was just it was pretty amazing. Like all the paraphernalia, all of the history, like the signed oyster shells on the walls. And
Yeah.
that coat. Like I just remember this crazy coat with
Yeah.
oysters on it, just hanging up. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I know
Okay.
exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, but that's Rodney's, right? Like
Yeah,
that's 33 years of
so
of
cool.
working together with people. I mean, stories, and there's just amazing stuff. I mean,
Do you
some of
have
the
one?
best.
One? No.
I
It's
want.
hard.
It's hard because um, what somebody was telling me this one hilarious story. I don't know if I'm going to tell it right, but anyways, back in the day, at the Rodneys at Adelaide and Jarvis, it was downstairs. It was just this really interesting place. But what happened is they had it was either Halloween or around Halloween or something like that. And what they did is they traced an actual body on the floor of somebody who died in the restaurant. So
What?
they put yeah, so they traced the body, they did the whole outline, they put caution tape, and then they pretended like it was just regular service. So when the host was bringing people in, they're like, very sorry, but please mind this area as you're walking in. There was a bit of an accident last night, but your table's right over here. So you'd have to walk around this like
Right.
drawing. They're like, it's still an active police investigation, so just don't touch anything or whatever. They used to do things like that. Like my
Yeah.
dad was telling me once, like you would get three hour lineups sometimes at the old place, right? Because it was about like
Wow.
six. It was about I think it was about 60 seats or less. It was very small,
Yeah.
but people would wait. But one day there was a good lineup, and when you waited out there, you'd get like marinated mussels as a treat, and maybe a glass of wine or a beer.
Yeah.
It was hospitable, but you didn't have to have a license to have that beer in the stairway while you were
Yeah.
and nowadays your
Yeah.
place gets shut down. So
Yeah.
but he would hand out magic mushrooms, and people would start eating the magic mushrooms, right? So they're waiting for their table. Then now all of a sudden, like the third seating of the night sits down, and everybody's like, oh, right? And so like, and but the staff is too, right? Like the
Oh my
staff used to
God.
have the most fun, because there was only 4 or 5 of them working at a time, and
Yeah.
they go into the kitchen, and then they all come out naked with just their aprons on. So the shuckers are back there with just an apron on and no other clothes, and they're shucking oysters, and
Oh my
the
goodness.
patrons are sitting there going like, "What's going on?"
What's going
And then the next thing you know, they're like tarps are off, and they're taking everything off, and now they're on the bar naked, and
Oh my
everybody's having.
gosh.
Yeah, this is how it was, but that's
That sounds
one more story. This is
okay.
a good one. Okay,
Okay.
so my dad comes in really early in the morning for some reason, and back in the day, like if you were a good regular, which there was a lot of them, if you were having a good time, he'd give you the key to the front door because he just asked you to lock it when you left.
Yeah.
So he comes in really early in the morning, and he noticed all the lights are off and the door was unlocked. Right, so the door's unlocked, all the lights are off. He goes in, and there's 2 or 3 candles lit up on the bar. And Elaine Bennett, who still works for us, apparently she was down there with some of the regulars, and they're sitting there and they're gunned, right? Everybody's gunned. But Elaine was practicing kung fu martial arts,
Okay.
and she was practicing spin kicks and putting out the candles with the
Oh boy.
wind from the spin kick.
Okay.
So my dad walks into Elaine doing spin kicks down on the bar. Right? There's just, I don't know. I mean, you can imagine.
I thought you were gonna say your dad got kicked in the face.
No, no, no. Luckily not. There is stories though of that, and there's probably people who'd like to do that to this day. But, um, you know, long stories short. It's just a place of, a good time. It's an honest
Yeah.
place. It's filled with amazing people that have worked really hard over the years. Some of the and girls have been working there for 25, 28 years.
Yeah.
So it's just it's a good time. It's an honest, it's just like oysters. It's just fun. That's why I
Yeah.
got into this,
So
because
cool.
it's
It's
awesome. And we
well,
have, yeah,
oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was just going to say, we have, oysters in Canada and around the world. They are fun.
Yeah.
It is an amazing product. It's surrounded by great people, hard people who work in the industry, hard people who grow the oysters. Shipping, all that kind of stuff. It's good energy. It's what we need.
Well, and I just love that Rodney's really has that culmination, and it is its own culture, but also
Oh yeah,
influences so much of the culture that you see now more broadly in Canada. I mean, just those crazy stories, which,
sure. Oh, those are tame too.
but right,
Yeah,
I know
the
Patrick McGurry has
mushroom.
told me a couple others. I'm
Oh
like, oh
yeah,
my god.
yeah. He was a part of it all, man. Shucker
I
Patty.
think
He's
he's
a
actually
part of
on
it all.
right now.
Oh, of course he is. Of course he is. And
And
he's got great stories.
yes, absolutely. And so, yeah, it is really incredible for people who haven't gone. Make a point to go. It's obviously not the same, but you definitely see everything, and
Yeah,
you get great
2020
oysters.
already sucks. I mean, but like,
Yeah, that once.
as we all grow up and stuff, like we still have fun and all the places around us that do oysters and everywhere, everybody has fun. If you go into a place and they have oysters and there's an oyster shucker,
Hmm.
go and sit at the bar and talk to him or her, because the chances are they're going to be the most fun people in the room and they're going to have a great time. So
Yeah,
I just I think that yeah, sure, Rodney's culture. Rodney's has a culture, but that's been brought up with everybody that's been a part of it over
yeah,
the 33 years, and that culture has grown and lives on in different places and stuff like
yeah.
that, including ours.
Cool. Well, I
Yeah.
think we are a little bit over time, but I just
Oh,
want to
for
finish
sure.
with one last question that I love to ask everybody. So, if you could visit anywhere else in the world to try their local oysters, where would you like to
Yeah,
go?
I was watching what you did in. You were speaking with Mark in the 46 South, and
Mm, in New
New Zealand
Zealand.
is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just never. I've never been there, and I'm just so on the other side of the world when the summer hits in North America, the species of gigas in Vancouver and Taylor shellfish in Washington and some of these places they go through that reproduction stage where I don't find an oyster to be as enjoyable on the half shell when it's spatting.
Hmm.
And it's just such an amazing thing to be able to get oysters sent to you from New Zealand when it's in their winter, and that oyster is firm, holding great texture,
Yeah.
and it's represented so well, like such a seasonal oyster. Sure, it costs an arm and a leg, but all the good things in life do. But um, yeah, I mean, I'd love to go there and just be on that coastline and see that operation and taste that, in the flesh, like live.
Yeah. Awesome. Me too. That's
Yeah,
definitely on the
yeah.
bucket list.
Hey, Mark, you better do it. We got 2 tickets and we're all allowed to fly. It's
Yeah,
on you,
Mark.
buddy. This is great stuff, Mark.
Well, thank you so much for spending, part of your morning with me talking
Truly,
oysters.
yeah, I appreciate you reaching out and, congratulations on doing this kind of stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
It gives everybody a good laugh, I hope, today. And, let's keep it easy and stay positive, right?
Sound good. Yeah. Hope you guys stay safe and
Oh,
enjoy the rest
yeah.
of the weekend.
Yeah.
All right. See ya.
See ya.
Okay. So that was Eamon Clark, who is the head purchaser of oysters at Rodney Oyster House. And that was amazing. I mean, definitely try and go. There's so much variety of oysters in Canada too, and I'm hoping that maybe later down the road we will cover some more specific regions for people who are interested in that. But yeah, the place to get all of them is going to be at Rodney's. So coming up this coming week, we are going to go to Portugal with Tiago Verissimo, who is the marketing director of a farm called Aqua Nostra. I had no idea Portugal farmed oysters, but apparently there's a growing population that do. And then also Denmark with Jonna Nielsen Bobbitt. She's an award-winning food and travel writer and photographer. based in Copenhagen. So she wrote an amazing piece about Denmark's oysters. We definitely clicked on the same vibe, so I'm really excited to talk to her. And thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you in a couple of days.